I'm Jonathan Strickland, host of the podcast Tech Stuff. I want to share with you stories about tech, old and new. I've researched topics ranging from the Antikythera device, which is a gadget from the ancient Greeks that was recovered from a shipwreck, and I've looked at more recent examples, like the Large Hadron Collider. Tech Stuff takes a close look at the biggest names and companies in tech, from Nikola Tesla to IBM. I look at how tech works and how it affects us. Listen to and follow Tech Stuff on the iHeartRadio app or subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
The Christina Lynn Podcast.
Who are you talking to right now? Who is it you think you see? Do you know how much I make a year? You clearly don't know who you're talking to, so let me clue you in. I am the danger. I am the one who knocks.
There was a period of time when we actually have to rent movies, and they'd be contained in these things called VHS and would come in boxes. There were stores and even libraries that would allow you to borrow these things, and if you didn't rewind, which means basically set the tape back to the beginning, you'd actually get fined. I used to rent or borrow movies from my library all the time. We didn't have anything else to do. Internet wasn't really huge when I was younger, and getting a TV with a VCR in your room was a big deal. At one point, I wanted to dive into horror, or at least scary films. There was one I found called Lady in White, which was said to have been shot in Rochester. And me, being young and scared of scary movies, I decided to give it a shot. I watched it during the day with the lights on and muted the moments that I found super scary. I did this a few times to get through it, and towards the second or third time, before I had to return it to the library, I came to appreciate and understand and like this movie. Upon researching it now as an adult, it is apparent that the movie is only loosely based on a local legend. In fact, if you Google Lady in White legend, there are several regions and interpretations of it, Rochester being mentioned as one. These are the versions of the Durand Eastman Lady in White legend. The story tells of a woman named Elisa, who has been wandering the area since the early 1800s in search of someone. As it's been passed down through generations, the story has been lost and there are a few different versions. The Lady in White, the White Lady, or the Lady in the Lake, is said to wander the park area obsessively looking for the body of her daughter, who was slain by a boyfriend or a group of hoodlums, depending on the story you hear. Another version says the daughter either ran away with a boy or she was abducted by another local farmer and later discovered to have been raped and murdered. Legend goes on to say that the Lady in White either killed herself in grief or died alone and heartbroken. In another version, Elisa was the victim of an abusive husband who eventually left her for another woman. Blinded by jealousy, she kills them both. Her ghost is said to stalk the roads of the park, quote, mistaking unfortunate young lovers in cars for her husband and his mistress, whom she seeks to slay again and again, doomed to reenact her crime with fresh victims over the centuries, end quote. In both cases, Elisa has a pre-existing mistrust of men, possibly due to her abusive husband. She discouraged her young daughter from socializing with boys, and her ghost is now said to attack any man who has the misfortune of interrupting her search. It's been reported that she appears as a thin, ugly old woman who moves along the shores of Lake Ontario with a pair of dogs, and other people say she's a youthful spirit who coalesces from the mists of Durand Lake. The movie Lady in White only shares the similarities of the legend, being that the name of the legend is Elisa, and we've got Melissa. It's a haunting lady by the lake, set in upstate New York. That's really it. In fact, it wasn't even filmed by Durand Eastman. It was filmed mainly in Wayne County. The plot of the movie follows a schoolboy in 1960s who becomes embroiled in a mystery surrounding a series of child murders after he witnesses the ghost of a young girl who was murdered in his school's coat closet, which he was locked in as a prank. The reviews for the movie were mostly positive, but the film was a box office bomb. It later earned a status as a cult film. Film had a budget of around $5 million and only grossed $1.7. In an interview with the writer, Frank LaLaggia, I'm probably saying that wrong, he says, I wrote the lot of the screenplay at my piano because of a flow of feeling, a melody or rhythm would begin to happen concurrently with the writing of the scene. Often the pacing of the music would dictate the rhythm of the scene as I wrote it. I recorded my themes and I would sometimes play them on cassettes for the actors. After filming was done, I transferred the film to video and recorded all of my arrangements to the picture with a Yamaha DX synthesizer and a Fostex 16-track recorder. Then I gave the completed film with synthesized arrangements to an orchestrator. Back in the 80s, a $5 million budget for a film is pretty intense. And in the same interview with Frank, he talks about how they relied on the stock market to fund this. Frank says, "My cousin Charlie Lagoglia, I'm sorry that I'm saying that wrong and butchering it, was the executive producer. He's an investment analyst and advisor in Rochester, New York. About 3 years ago, he examined the stock market with the prospect of taking our company public. As I was working on the script, he was putting together the financial vehicle and seeking out stockbrokers who might be interested in taking us public as penny stock. That means that we went out at 10 cents a share. Eventually, we sold stock over the counter with about 100 brokers across the country, minor firms, many of whom aren't even in the business anymore. We managed to raise $5 million on the basis at 10 cents a share. It's traded freely on the open market on a daily basis, just like Kodak. At one point during pre-production, it dipped to as low as 3 cents a share, but later it got as high as 16 cents a share." When asked what the investors and brokers got in exchange for their investment, Frank says, "What they got was a prospectus, a basic storyline, and the blessing of the SEC. Essentially, what they were looking at was the referral by their stockbroker. I would venture to guess that many of them didn't know what the hell the company was going to do. But once they began to get wind of what was happening, that we were going to make a quality motion picture, it became an intriguing prospect. We had people come in for as little as $200 and as much as $100,000. You could do that with our offering. But I don't want to make it sound simple. We were in the process of casting the picture. I had already hired a number of key people, and about 5 weeks before we were to start production, everything fell apart. So we were sitting there with about $500,000 in the bank, with a picture budgeted at $4.7 million. We made phone calls for 2 days and magically found a couple of new brokerage firms ready to come aboard at the last minute. But we began production with only about $700,000 in the bank." Now that's pretty intense, especially for the 80s and especially for upstate New York. Roger Ebert even had a review of this movie. And here he is. "It's kind of tricky reviewing a movie like this. Almost nothing I can say will accurately reflect the tone of the film. I can write about ghosts and killers and strange old ladies, and I could be describing a much different film. But Lady in White, like most good films, depends more on style and tone than it does on story. And after a while, it's the whole insidious atmosphere of the film that begins to envelop us. Like the best ghost stories of M.R. James and Oliver Onions, who were the best in their classic field, Lady in White is finally not really about being frightened by ghosts, but about feeling pity for them." I echo this sentiment that Roger Ebert just said tenfold. This was a great movie. It is a psychological thriller more than it is a horror film. And the fact that it is shot in Rochester, or even based out of somebody who is around here, is pretty cool to me. For more information and new content, go to xtinalynn.com. That's XTINALYNNE.com.
The Christina Lynn Podcast.